There is this nuclear power plant called Bushehr on the Iranian coastline. If any debris or strike would shut down its power, it wouldn't be able to cool anymore and decay heat would melt the core within a few days. That's if the war prevents immediate response, which would be quite likely. If containment was also severed, also likely in the case of a strike, enough cesium-137, which has a half-life of 30 years, would be released and would contaminate the Persian Gulf. But the thing with the Persian Gulf is that it flushes very slowly, which means that the concentration would actually stay high for decades. The eastern coast of the Arabic Peninsula runs on desalination plants and more than 10 million people just have no alternative. It is true that they would filtrate more than 99% of the cesium. But firstly, that cesium would be rejected meters away from where the plant gets its water, and so the concentration would soon multiply. And secondly, no state would ever distribute water that holds radioactive elements, because anybody in their kitchen could test the water and a single positive result would permanently undermine how people trust the state. 10 million people would have to evacuate within days to weeks, and they simply won't be able to. Airspace is currently closed. The land around them is very hard to pass. And at very optimistic rates, they would be evacuated by air in about months to years, way after the reserves empty. Sanitation, hospitals, cooling during seasons of lethal heat and industry could all turn off before anybody dies of thirst. The cities would become inhabitable while trucks would still bring enough water for everyone to drink. What makes it really different from any other mass evacuation is the fact that they will never be able to come back. Around 8 million of those people would be foreign workers, nearly always coming from Asia. Some countries like Nepal, Bangladesh or Pakistan simply depend on the money that's sent back for their foreign currency stream. As workers stop trying to exchange Arabic currencies for the one of their countries, the demand for those currencies would drop so sharply that its worth would do the same. Nepal would be a casualty of a nuclear incident on the Iranian coastline. You might think that bombing the desalination plants would do the same, just cleaner, but they take days to weeks to repair and there are more than 400 of them. What could more effectively be done is throwing oil at the sea. Only 3 days of pre-war Iranian production would be enough to make the water of the Gulf unsuitable for most desalination plants, as they usually take water from right under the surface, which is where oil sits. It would, for a few weeks per discharge, seriously impair access to fresh water, but is fightable with screens and floating barriers. Plants could also just draw water from deeper. While Iran could make the Gulf a strategically water-broke zone, it also made one itself by draining its own water. Tehran, the capital, has 10 million inhabitants and its reservoirs fell to less than 12% of their capacity. It even nearly hit zero in summer 2025. The aquifers are so dry that the ground itself is compacting in such a way that buildings, roads and infrastructure all frequently crack. The aquifers are going to collapse because of it and they will never be able to replenish again. The only solution that was found is to move the capital. But the other main cities are also under such stress and sometimes it's even worse for them. This process isn't caused by Iranian geography. It comes directly from the regime and the fact that it is extractive in essence, meaning that the institutions only serve the purpose of transferring resources from the population to the elite. For nearly 50 years now, the regime has been building a very impressive amount of water infrastructure, mostly justified by the necessity for a pariah state to be agriculturally self-sufficient. In reality, most of the projects, especially the absurdly many dams, are nonsensical and only serve the purpose of embezzlement. The facade of a theocratic regime hides one of the most morally depraved elites on earth. The mullahs, the members of the Shia clergy, supply the legitimacy while the revolutionary guards are the general extractive and ruling class. They are the ones running the water mafia and even benefit from the death of Tehran as the contract for the new capital is estimated at nearly $100 billion, which is more embezzlement potential than they could ever dream of. The rural population will be the ones suffering first. They have the most fragile water sources and depend on them as they don't have the infrastructure to last on supplied water, which they wouldn't have anyways as cities are way more important for the regime's survival. People, often from ethnic minorities, then move to the cities which are already water-stressed. And that's in a country where half of the workforce is seriously threatened because of the crumbling economy and the 60% inflation rate. The regime could fix that situation, but it would require to go down on the water mafia which significantly worsens and entrenches the crisis. But is also the armed forces of the regime. They are the ones that defend the regime from potential uprisings and manifestation. Iran is only 60% ethnically Iranian with another 20%, the Azeris, that are fully integrated. That leaves us with 20% of the country, meaning 17 million people, of ethnically non-integrated frontier population. That population would see the water from their regions being diverted to the ethnically integrated cities, which would radicalize those frontiers to a great extent and could seriously lead to armed insurgency, just like what happened in Syria. Those who would have gone to the cities would only add to a general urban poverty situation, adding fuel to a crisis happening directly in the places the regime lives on. You'd probably be surprised at how long and how bad things can get without a regime failing, and even more so at the fact that it could very well not fall at all. One of the greatest things history teaches us is a mechanism Tocqueville first named. Suffering can be endured to great extent but becomes unbearable the moment it's partly relieved, the moment hope emerges. Expectation on top of that then outrun reality, partly pushed by the new unbearable character of the situation, and revolutions happened. Here, with no amelioration in sight, the revolution is very much improbable for a very long time. Now this is a current fact and not speculation. Iran is currently crumbling as a country outside of politics, and there is only one way it could turn back, and that's with a regime change, which might make the situation way worse as well as it could maybe make it a bit better. The regime is one of extraction and so has accepted and accommodated for the country's decline. A serious deal with the West, having the sanction lift for example, would go against the extractive incentives of the regime. The regime has always shown a very impressive cohesion, and it's probably the reason it has been so strong. Fixing the water situation would directly go against the Revolutionary Guard's incentive, and destroy that cohesion, after which the regime might get weak enough for change to happen. The real thing that can hit the regime hard is the loss of religious legitimacy. The entire purpose of the revolution was to make Iran the center of political Shiism. For centuries, the center of Shiism was Najaf in Iraq, while the dominant position was Quietism. It's the idea that the clergy should only guide and not rule. Khomeini, the first supreme leader of Iran, took the minority-backed idea of rule of the jurist, that the clergy should rule, which became the consensus as he was state-backed, and Qom became the theological and political center of Shiism. Now, after the last supreme leader's death, the new one, Mujtaba, has no serious religious credential as he was installed by the Revolutionary Guards. The thing is that the center of Shia authority is portable. It goes to whatever place is the most credible. And Qom's credibility as a religious center has been badly hit by the regime installing an unqualified Ayatollah. The most followed authority in the Shia world is now the Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani, who resides in Najaf and is the embodiment of the Quietist doctrine. He has spent his career declining to size power, which is what makes him extremely credible in a way that a supreme leader can never be. This is a direct hit to the foundational claim of the regime. It reverses the revolution's intent, destroy the entire legitimacy of the regime, and do all of those things in a probably permanent way. Since the beginning of the war, the Guards have accumulated much more power than they once had, and no credible Ayatollah would accept to become supreme leader. That loss of legitimacy means that the various factions of the government have less incentive to stay loyal and more to focus on their own survival. You might see Pakistan as the neutral mediator where the negotiations happen, but it's in reality the last Sunni resort in case of escalation. The country is the only Sunni nuclear power and guarantees Saudi Arabia a nuclear response if attacked, which means that the nuclear escalation is way closer than we usually think. For now, that guarantee is mere words on paper, but it means that the Gulf could get nuclear multipolar overnight and open the door to an ambiguity itself much worse than what could ever happen with the nuclear power plant of Bushehr. The war is currently limited to precision strikes and a naval blockade, far from mass urgent migrations. Humanitarian crisis bigger than anything we ever saw, a 93 million people country eroding to misery with no solution in sight, and a potentially overnight nuclear escalation. Some of those things are already happening, and for the rest we only have hope.